Welcome to the third episode of Doorbin, the podcast series by Center for Peace and Justice, BRAC University, in short, CPJ. In this episode, we will discuss CPJ and World Faith's Development Dialogue's long-standing collaboration to understand how faith affects different dimensions of critical development themes. Today we have with us Dr. Samia Hawk, Dean of General Education at BRAC University, and Dr. Sudipto, Senior Researcher at the World Faith's Development Dialogue. Keep listening to explore faith's implications on education, gender and social inclusion, youth, media, communications, and climate challenges.
My name is Samia Hawk. I'm Dean of General Education and Professor of Anthropology at BRAC University. And I'm also a research fellow at the Center for Peace and Justice at BRAC University, where I oversee a project in collaboration with the World Faith's Development Dialogue, which is situated in the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs at Georgetown University. So I oversee the Bangladesh end of the project, which is on faith dimensions of development and social cohesion.
Hello, my name is Sudipto. I actually sit on the other spectrum of this project, which is in the DC. So I'm a senior researcher at the World Faith's Development Dialogue, and I'm a research fellow at the Berkeley Center as well. So World Faith's Development Dialogue is a very small nonprofit organization that started at the World Bank around 2009, I think. And it has several country projects in Africa and in South Asia and Bangladesh. So, Samia, I started working for this project in 2019, I believe. But the project has been running since 2013.
The project has been running since 2014, in fact, is when we had our first sort of introductory initiation meeting. I met Dr. Catherine Marshall, who runs WFDD, I believe in 2011. And there was some interest on their part to sort of look at the Bangladeshi landscape. They'd already done a little bit of a scoping, but they didn't have a presence here. And that sort of our meeting opened up the possibilities for a partnership that has now endured almost 10 years. So we began in 2014, and we began with the interest of understanding the landscape to start with a little better. The landscape for what? Landscape of faith-inspired actors who work in development and who work towards development. And we know that faith-inspired institutions, organizations, actors have, maybe they don't call their work development per se, but they're community mobilizers. They have a community presence. They often, very often, are engaged in all kinds of welfare activities. And of course, they also have always played a big role in education, both formal and non-formal. So they are very much in that public space of doing good for the community. However, that voice was not very well understood, and in fact, it was probably dislodged a little bit. We wanted to understand the landscape, and we wanted to understand these faith-inspired organizations, institutions, as well as actors, given their insights about them are often lost under the weight of another kind of development that Bangladesh is very known for, which is very much which happens through a secular framework. So we wanted to understand, first of all, understand this world, but we also wanted to bring both the faith-inspired development actors as well as the secular development actors in a conversation. So in a way, the first round of this project was called the Speakers Forum on Faith and Development, because our task was to organize these fora where people would come together and have a conversation about the work they do, possible ways to bridge gaps, misunderstandings, and to actually just hear and know one another a little bit better.
So you were creating a platform basically.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That was 2014 to 17, I would say, was doing a lot of the groundwork, creating platforms, getting to know these actors, and for a variety of actors to know that this BRAC University and WFDD collaboration, that's what it seeks to do.
And in 2019, the project took a more of like a theme-based approach. So there were four specific themes selected for the country work: education, gender, and then climate change and youth and media, right? And since then, the project has looked at several issues. For the education sector, we looked at who is doing what in Bangladesh, what kind of faith-based education is provided, who is providing that, and what kind of social cohesion messages are conveyed through this education. What your experience has been so far in the faith and education sector?
Our experience, I think, has been that the landscape is vast, it's complex, it has certain kinds of historical inheritances that we carry today. Yet Bangladesh is fast developing, and I think it does have aspirations that are cohesive, are pluralistic, and education is an area where that message has to really come front and center. As we sort of very ambitiously want to graduate to a middle income country, it's very important that these messages, for a long time, education is about access, is about increasing numbers, but also increasing quality, not just in numeracy literacy, but quality in the messages that we give, by way of social cohesion, by way of pluralism, by way of a new prosperous Bangladesh. What is that prosperous Bangladesh going to look like? What about young people? What kind of messages do they receive? And therefore, very rightfully, we highlighted education. And in doing that work, of course, we did, in our research, we did come up with certain kinds of shortfalls on the messaging that textbooks carry, both in the secular stream as well as the religious stream. And by the religious stream, we looked at religious textbooks from a variety of religious perspectives, but we also looked at the curriculum and some textbooks of the madrasa, the Qawmi madrasa stream. And of course, we did, as researchers always do, we did point out certain kinds of shortfalls, where we could do better in terms of giving a message of social cohesion. And, this finding, of course, is part of an ongoing journey, both for us as researchers and platform builders, but also for the story of education in Bangladesh. I think it's a very important and it's a very interesting moment right now that needs to be seized in very positive ways. And I think our platform wishes to do that. So as we did that, as we found things that we could, work on, continue to work on in terms of social cohesion and education in Bangladesh, we did also form several kinds of partnerships externally. People who think about ethics and education, people who think about philosophy and spirituality in religious training. So we've worked with Notre Dame University in Indiana. We've formed some relationships with the Arigato Foundation that is very big for ethics education. And again, since we want to come to our original premise of platform building, we're very happy to have, been part of something that allowed these circuits to, these networks to circulate in Bangladesh. We've done some interesting work piloting the Madrasa Discourses project in Bangladesh. So it's ongoing, it's evolving. And although we feel like we've done some interesting work for education in Bangladesh, we're definitely not done.
No. It's such a huge field. Almost 13% of Bangladesh's children, school-going children, go to madrasas, and it's expanding field. There are more and more madrasas and temple-based education and other forms of religious education are being done and built. So we will see a lot more work to be done in the next few years, I think. And then we moved to gender, and we looked at some really unfortunate and sad incidents, the gender-based violence, especially when we saw an uptick of those numbers going up during the pandemic. So we finished the education project or shared our findings in January of 2020, and immediately COVID hit. So our gender work was marred by that global pandemic. But we had several interesting findings. We looked at how faith leaders, whether and how faith leaders work on gender-based violence in Bangladesh, preventing gender-based violence, and also whether NGOs, local civil society and NGOs, include and involve faith leaders in mitigating this social problem. You are yourself as a gender specialist also. What do you think is are the main dynamics between faith and gender issues in Bangladesh?
That, I think, is one of the most vexed questions because faith perspectives and gender have always been at loggerheads. There's a history. That's a global history, right? And we see that cleft playing out in Bangladesh, of course, as well. There are some global examples of attempts to bridge that cleft. And we have seen some organizations in Bangladesh as well trying to leverage faith-inspired actors and institutions towards a progressive gender agenda. It remains a vexed question, and Sudipto, I think our research also yielded that. When we were doing that gender-based violence research, we did not really find NGOs particularly warm to working with faith-based institutions, and to be fair, faith-based institutions were also very tentative in articulating their gender agenda. Now, I think for us as a research and platform building initiative, again, like education, the work is, I would say, we're just scratching the surface of the work that needs to be done. And I don't think we can do it. I think it's to keep the conversation alive, and it's to educate all quarters involved in ways that there is a benefit to building some bridges and reducing the cleft. For me, I think as a part of keeping this work going, it's to bring more people out, more voices out, more women's voices out. And I think that's a very important takeaway for us. What we did, of course, we did that piece of research where it was a few new insights, but really it was bringing home the point of the cleft between the secular world and the religious world vis-a-vis gender. But then you will find when you talk to women, especially young women, you will find interesting perspectives on both sides that are beyond the official narrative. So one of the very interesting things we did is, as a part of sort of the intersection between education, we looked at madrasa education and gender, was host a writing workshop for madrasa graduates. And these women consider themselves young women of faith, and they're very much torchbearers of faith. Yet they consider themselves to be writers, fiction writers, and novelists and journalists. And women writing in Bengal there's a rich history to that, and that's always been quite progressive. So our question was, well, who are these women and what do they want? And I think that work is still ongoing, and I look forward to that work coming out in the form of a publication where that will be made more available and accessible to the public. But for me, in terms of looking at the faith world and gender, I think one issue that I would really like all of us to think about and work on is female leadership in the religious world. And I think that's not a conversation that's really out there in the public space. It's not that we don't have examples of it in history, plenty. And currently, we do have examples, notably in Indonesia, where they actually have female ulama and an ulama council. And of course, Islam has been a civil society player in countries such as Indonesia in a way that it has not been for us. It's been considered a much more political force. But women coming out and being able to speak for themselves and form collectives where what they put out in terms of what women can and can do goes through their own experiences and own aspirations without the cloud of male voices. I think that's been a great learning for us from the secular women's collectivizing, And I think if religious or women who consider themselves, for whatever reason, not part of that secular collective, but torchbearers of, a collective faith-based world in whatever way, if they were allowed to have that space, what would they say by way of women's needs? And what would that mean for the bigger question of religion and women and gender eventually? I think that's something that I would like to perhaps, if we were to have a round three, that is something that I would like to pick up on. In fact, before COVID happened, we wanted to do this work on reaching out to, there isn't official leadership, but there is a second tier that, of imams' wives and, priests' wives or very active teachers in the madrasas or in the convents, listening to their voices to understand where they are in terms of their aspirations for leadership. That work got a little bit thwarted because of the pandemic, but I think that's an important issue, I think, globally in terms of what's going on, and it tags nicely with the question of ethics and education.
Right.
And education, not necessarily, or not only for religion, but about religion, towards pluralism. So I think that dovetails very nice. The question of female religious leadership dovetails very nicely from that kind of a take on education as well.
So what could be done to highlight and build that kind of leadership in the context of Bangladesh? What do you think?
Many things. There has to be state patronage of these things. There has to be proper policies in place. There have to be proper measures that allot women a certain kind of space in official leadership. You have to have the right kind of training for women and exposure and enough women wanting to come out. My hunch is from talking to a lot of religious women that they would want to.
Okay.
Of course, there's resistance both at a macro, but also at a societal level. There's family resistance and all of that. That narrative has not caught fire yet, that women can. And I don't think it's about to catch fire anytime soon, certainly not next year. But if we think that there is a possibility for greater good for society in that, that's probably something we may start to invest in. And as researchers and platform builders, that should be something that we should be able to start to talk about.
Absolutely. So we see a lot of male voices in the public religion sphere in Bangladesh. For example, if you look at the Waz mahfils or the other sermons in Hinduism and Christianity, you hear a lot of male voices giving the sermons on a regular basis. You do not see a lot of women voices offering those sermons, doing Waz mahfils, where hundreds and thousands of people are joining, right? So, and I know that you looked at Waz mahfil as a research topic when you looked at youth and media and religion.
Yes. So, no, we don't see women on the pulpit. We don't in a public pulpit. it is all male voices, and therefore um, my position is that the narrative is going to be very male centered. Uh, the narrative that comes across in terms of what men and women should do, what families should look like, what their appropriate roles are, will be biased towards what works for men. Now, it's not to say that women don't have a role. Like I said, they do have informal roles, or they play an important role in terms of speaking to other women.
Right.
And oftentimes it is women come to other women, women of religious knowledge and training and some form of leadership, for both religious counsel as well as personal counsel, right? So it's not that women don't act as alims, women don't act as, and of course in some of the other faith traditions in Christianity, there are sisters, and they're ordained. So it's not that that isn't there, but by and large, it's still under a male voice and a male-centric umbrella. I do believe that if women were to be on the pulpit, they may start out saying those very male-centric things, but they will, if you allow them to collectivize, they will actually say things. Since their job is not to sacrifice faith, they won't, but they will say things that actually work better for women.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's an important organic way in which you can also see an organic flow and energy into the role and place of religion in the everyday life. Right? Religion, we know as a social scientist, is never a static phenomenon. It's dynamic. It moves with the times. It moves with people's aspirations. So why not allow women to also speak through it, and for themselves through it, right?
And I know that you organized several workshops, writing workshops with some madrasa graduates, female madrasa graduates. So they're very young and energetic and very enterprising, right?
Absolutely.
And that also takes you to the media and youth component of the research and the project.
Sudipta, why don't I throw this question at you?
Okay.
Because I know that you were more involved on this. So if we're looking at a particular kind of ethical basis in terms of how we teach religion, perhaps, right? Or if we think of that ethical grounding to create a different kind of gendered voice around religion. What does that mean for how people consume religion and how media portrays it or might portray it? What do you think is coming out of the research?
Well, as you said, the voices are out there are very male. So most of the times they are talking about male issues, or they are maybe talking for the women, what kind of clothes they should wear, what kind of education they should have, and things like that. Now, that could be a narrative that is shared among women too, but it would be better if women could hear those words, those ideas, those conversations from their own counterparts, right? Now, if that were to happen, that I think social media could play a first mover's role, because religion is not very much restricted anymore into those religious institutions, traditional ones. It has moved beyond that and gone to social media. So there are lots and lots of social media-based pages and other blogs where people are writing and women are writing also. So I see a proliferation of women voices to some extent in those social media pages, and sometimes they may have taken a male name under a fake profile, but that's a reality. That's a social reality that they are still talking or conversing, but taking a male name. But what we are seeing that there are a lot more engagement on the social media. So people are learning about religion and having conversations about religion and various religious components on social media. So we started a research where we did a visual ethnography of these social media pages, especially the ones that are created for those was mahfil. So these are the was mahfils that are recorded and then shared on social media. So we wanted to see what kind of engagements are people doing under the social media. Are they liking this sermons? What parts of the sermon they're liking and disliking? What kind of reactions they're doing? And through this social engagement on the social media pages, we wanted to see what people are thinking about certain development aspects like education, like female education, like
gender and
the
family,
gender.
and
Right. And the research is ongoing. We are still doing some data analysis, and it will be shared in the next couple of months. But I think this kind of research would be very beneficial for our social policymakers also, to see how people are learning about religion nowadays, what kind of involvement they have, and especially these are young population of Bangladesh, and then devise some social policies around this.
Mhm. And Sudipto, just to take the conversation a little further, we also did some work on mainstream media
Right.
and journalists.
Right.
Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah. So we know that the traditional media, the newspaper media, and the TV media, electronic media, they do report on faith. Be it on Fridays about the importance of religion, be specific religious festival wise, like during Durga Puja, so we see that they're publishing special editions. There are reporters who report on religion, but we worked with small organizations called Center for Communication Action Bangladesh, CCAB. They organized 4 or 5 workshops with local journalists, and they basically asked them, are you comfortable reporting on faith? How do you do it? Where do you get all this information? And there is a serious dearth of knowledge among the reporters on how to report on faith. Many reporters feel very, very intimidated by this idea of reporting on faith, because they do not know the theological background of various faith traditions, and often they offer like stereotypical information about faith. So the CCAB came back to us and said that, hey, why don't you create a handbook, a resource for the journalists, so, and in both languages, English and Bangla, so that these people can at least have something to work on. So we looked at global best practices, what people are doing in different countries, how they're engaging with faith, what kind of ethical challenges they are facing when they're reporting on faith. Because we see like how one news can be misinterpreted, and then a huge impact can kill people or call social unrest in Bangladesh. That has happened many times. So this is a very important topic, and we are almost finishing up the handbook, and we will be disseminating that among all the media houses in Bangladesh, and also keep it open online so that anybody can use it.
So I just wanted to add that, this handbook is actually a very interesting value addition, I think, not just for Bangladesh, but everywhere else, because wherever I've talked about it globally, they're very excited by the prospect that we actually came up with this idea, and that we will actually have a final product, right, by the end. This would take us to our last point, which is sort of course, it feeds into the larger idea of social cohesion, without a doubt. But and of course, the whole question of the ethical grounding in terms of how we understand our world and our place in it is also very important. But it's also a much more scientific project, which is climate change. And the last part of our project, we wanted to look at something that allows us to understand the relationship between the faith world and climate change. So could you shed some light on that?
Yes. So Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable countries to climatic changes, right? And we have been talking about lots of impact of climate change in Bangladesh, for example, on livelihoods of people, on land use and land management, on public health, um, on various aspects of life. But what we do not do or think about, like these people are also people of faith. How would climate change impact how people pray, how people think of religion when they're greeted by many disasters, more frequent disasters, more stronger disasters?
And to what extent does it matter to them?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And we talk about internally displaced people. How do they carry faith with them when they're moving from one place to another? How do they deal with the idea of holy, holy place? Because when you talk about climate change and its effects, we are talking about humans and all other ecosystems.
And their everyday life.
Yeah. And their everyday life. So with that, we first thought that we will write a research paper. And then we decided, okay, so lots of people are writing research papers, lots of research articles are being done and out. Why don't we do something much more relatable? With that thought, we wanted to create a documentary film on the impact of climate change on faith, or how the faith dimensions intertwine with climate change. So we commissioned an independent filmmaker in Bangladesh, and they have been filming for the last 6-7 months, and now it's on the editing panel. So they are finding some very interesting footages, and they're documenting all these discussions that are having, the faith communities are having over climate change. So there is a dearth of knowledge. Lots of faith leaders do not maybe associate climate change with their daily life.
So there is some scientific climate literacy, perhaps, that needs to happen.
Right. The climate change literacy should be taught among faith leaders, basically. Like they do not, they relate in different ways. Like we do not.
So perhaps that literacy should also be relate to them. That knowledge should be relayed to them. The scientific knowledge should be relayed to them in a way that is much more digestible for them.
I mean, they have great knowledge about climate is changing, the environment is changing. You talk to them, the interview team talk to them, and they have very detailed understanding of how things are changing. But they may not be speaking the climate change jargon.
Sure.
So that's why maybe they should also know about the globally accepted terms. But at the same time, we should also listen to them, learn from them how their constituents are suffering from climatic changes,
or how they even think of resilience,
right,
and how to build resilience.
Absolutely.
Right.
So I welcome everybody to look out for this documentary to be out in the next couple of months.
Very exciting.
Yep.
And I think something, again, like the handbook for journalists, something quite new.
Absolutely.
For Bangladesh. So I think, wow, through the pandemic and everything, now that we're talking about it, some interesting insights, some old, some new nuances, some good products by way of journal articles, white papers, policy briefs, reports, handbooks, documentaries, and some very important and interconnected themes that are very, very pertinent to development and social cohesion in Bangladesh.
Right.
So we look forward to continuing this interesting work and to continue to be a platform that builds bridges, that puts people in touch with each other towards a better, more prosperous, more cohesive Bangladesh, and if we may be ambitious, the region, the world.
Absolutely. Our work is slow, but consistent and important.
It's not that slow. But this one was measured because we wanted to take a couple of years to look at this work in depth, and I think we're well placed for the next phase.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Sudipta.